The Duke's fiancé pushed his lawful wife into the lake and smiled as the guests screamed. Duke Adrian stepped forward, but instead of rebuking Lady Beatrice, he ordered Eleanor to surrender the object she had found beneath the water. Dripping and breathless, Eleanor stood waist-deep in the lake, with a gold locket clenched above her head. Hours earlier, Adrian had accused her of forging their marriage settlement and announced that Beatrice would take her place. He had refused Eleanor's request to compare the disputed signature with his father's private correspondence, choosing ambition over the wife who had protected his estate for 7 years. Now, the recovered locket bore his father's crest, although it looked newly polished. Beatrice's face turned white when Eleanor found the concealed hinge. Inside was a miniature portrait, a broken seal, and 4 handwritten numbers. Eleanor recognized them immediately. They marked the exact page and line of the document Adrian claimed she had forged. "Give it to me," Adrian commanded. Eleanor looked toward the bank. Nearly 200 guests had gathered for what they had believed was a summer garden party. Ladies in pale gowns stood frozen beneath silk parasols. Gentlemen who had applauded Adrian's announcement only minutes earlier now avoided Eleanor's eyes. Not one person stepped forward to help the woman who was still, in law and before God, the Duchess of Ravenshire. Only Mrs. Finch, Eleanor's elderly companion, tried to force her way through the crowd. 2 footmen blocked her at Beatrice's order. "You heard his grace," Beatrice said. Her red skirts fluttered in the breeze as if nothing violent had occurred. "Return the locket before you invent another claim upon his family." Eleanor's wet gown dragged against her legs as she climbed the stone steps. Each movement sent pain through her shoulder, but she refused Adrian's outstretched hand. She had accepted too many gestures from him that looked like kindness before becoming instruments of control. When she reached the lawn, water pooled around her ivory slippers. Adrian removed his coat and held it toward her. "Cover yourself." "Why?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Your guests have already seen what you permit to be done to your wife." A murmur passed through the crowd. Adrian's expression hardened. He had once admired her composure. During the early years of their marriage, he had called it her rarest strength. Now that same composure seemed to anger him because it prevented him from dismissing her as hysterical. "This gathering was meant to settle the matter with dignity," he said. "You announced your engagement while still married to me. Our separation will be recognized. Because you intend to prove I forged the settlement. Because the evidence already proves it." Eleanor opened the locket wider. The broken fragment of dark green wax rested behind the miniature. 3 crossed feathers had been pressed into its surface, the private seal of Adrian's late father. Only family correspondence and confidential estate instructions had ever carried that mark. The 4 numbers had been written beneath it in faded brown ink. 47, 12, 6, 3, page 47, line 12. 6th word, 3rd letter. Her father, a respected solicitor, had taught her to read such references when she was a child. Important clauses were sometimes recorded through numerical keys, so that a stolen note revealed nothing without its companion document. The page in question belonged to the original marriage settlement, the very document Adrian claimed she had altered. "Where did you get that?" Beatrice demanded. The sharpness in her voice silenced everyone. Eleanor turned toward her. "You should know. You pushed me directly toward it." Beatrice's nostrils flared. She planted it. "This entire spectacle was arranged to embarrass us." "Us?" Eleanor repeated. The single word landed more forcefully than a shout. Beatrice moved closer and lowered her voice. "Give it to me now, and perhaps His Grace will still allow you a respectable allowance when you leave." Eleanor studied her. Beatrice was not staring at the locket itself. She was watching the 4 numbers inside it. That distinction mattered. Adrian reached for Eleanor's wrist. "Enough." She stepped back before he could touch her. 7 years ago, Adrian had placed his signet ring beside hers and promised that no disagreement would ever be decided without both of them being heard. That morning, Eleanor had reminded him of that promise. She had brought the disputed settlement, correspondence written by his father, and a letter from the solicitor who witnessed their signatures. Adrian had refused to examine any of it. Instead, he had accepted a single accusation from Beatrice, that Eleanor had inserted a clause granting Bellmere Manor to a trust beyond her husband's control. Bellmere was not merely a country house. Its rents supported 43 tenant families, a village school, and the widows of men killed in a mine collapse 5 winters earlier. Eleanor had spent years repairing its accounts after discovering that the estate steward had charged false debts against the tenants. If Adrian invalidated the settlement, Bellmere would return to his direct control, and Beatrice had already persuaded him to sell it. "Your Grace," called Mr. Harcourt, the family's grey-haired solicitor, "if the object bears your father's private seal, it should be examined before witnesses." Adrian glanced at Beatrice. It was brief, but Eleanor saw the question in his eyes and the warning in hers. Then he made his choice. "No," Adrian said. "The locket is ducal property. Take it from her." The 2 footmen released Mrs. Finch and advanced across the lawn. Eleanor closed the locket and slipped it inside her wet bodice. "Any man who lays a hand upon me," she said, "will do so before every magistrate and peer standing here." Both servants stopped. Beatrice laughed, but the sound was brittle. "You have no power left." "Perhaps not," Eleanor replied. "But I still know how evidence must be witnessed." She turned to Mr. Harcourt. "You saw the crest, the broken seal, the numbers, and the place where the locket was recovered." "I did." "So did I," said Lord Whitcomb from among the guests. A second gentleman raised his voice. Then an older lady confirmed it. Within moments, 6 people had publicly established what Adrian had tried to seize in silence. Beatrice's smile disappeared. Adrian stared at Eleanor as though he no longer recognized her. "You will leave Ravenshire House before midnight." There it was, the punishment he had prepared before the party began. Eleanor should have felt only grief. Instead, she noticed Beatrice looking toward the lake, where a gardener was quietly pulling a length of newly cut cord from beneath the stone landing. The cord had been tied to the locket. It had not been lost there years ago. Someone had hidden it beneath the water recently, and Beatrice had pushed Eleanor into the lake because she believed the fall would destroy her dignity. But Eleanor now understood the truth. The public humiliation had never been the real purpose of the garden party. It had been arranged to remove her from Ravenshire House before midnight, before she could reach page 47 of the original settlement. Eleanor turned toward Ravenshire House before Adrian could read the realization on her face. Her wet slippers sank into the grass, and every step pulled the weight of her soaked gown against her bruised shoulder. But she did not look back at the guests or at the woman who had pushed her. "Mrs. Finch hurried after her the moment the footmen moved aside. "Your Grace, we must get you warm. We must reach the West Archive," Eleanor replied. "The original settlement is stored in the blue deed box, and someone intends to remove it before midnight." They entered through the terrace doors, while the music outside resumed with painful uncertainty. Adrian had apparently ordered the musicians to continue, as though a pleasant melody could erase the sight of his fiancée attacking his wife. Inside, Eleanor stopped beneath the portrait of the late Duke. The man's painted hand rested upon a book, while 3 crossed feathers were carved into the chair beside him. The same emblem, pressed into the broken wax inside the locket. "Lock the door," she told Mrs. Finch. Eleanor removed the locket from her bodice and placed it on the dressing table. She then changed into a plain dark blue gown with Mrs. Finch's help, wrapped the wet locket in clean linen, and examined it beneath the window. The gold surface was old, but the mud caught inside the chain links was fresh. One hinge had recently been replaced. Whoever had hidden it in the lake had expected it to be recovered, but perhaps not by Eleanor, and certainly not before the disputed settlement disappeared. A knock sounded at the door. Mr. Harcourt entered after Mrs. Finch admitted him. His face was grave. "His Grace has ordered the household staff not to assist you. Then it is fortunate I never required assistance to read a contract." Eleanor showed him the locket, without surrendering it. Mr. Harcourt leaned closer, careful not to touch the evidence. "That is the late Duke's private crest, and these numbers direct us to page 47, line 12, the 6th word, and its 3rd letter." "Of which document?" "My marriage settlement. The same one Adrian claims. I altered." Mr. Harcourt's gaze sharpened. "The original should be in the family archive. It was there yesterday." Eleanor knew, because she had checked the deed box herself after Beatrice first accused her of forgery. For 7 years, Adrian had left the management of Ravenshire's private properties, largely in Eleanor's hands. When she arrived as a new bride, Bellmere Manor had been losing nearly £2,000 a year. Tenants had been charged for repairs that were never completed. Grain had vanished between the estate barns and the London markets, and widows listed for pensions had received nothing for months. Adrian had dismissed those irregularities as the unavoidable disorder of a large inheritance. Eleanor had not. Her father had trained her to follow every figure to its origin, every signature to the hand that formed it, and every seal to the person authorized to use it. Within 3 years, Bellmere's debts had been reduced by half. Within 5, the school reopened. Last winter, the estate had produced enough income to repair 12 tenant cottages without borrowing a single pound. Adrian had accepted the praise at county dinners, but he had never once asked how Eleanor achieved it. Beatrice had. She had asked about the rents, the trusts, the authority of the stewards, and the exact date on which Bellmere could legally be sold. Eleanor had mistaken those questions for admiration. Now she understood they had been an examination. "If Adrian removes me tonight," Eleanor said, "Beatrice will gain access to the household offices. Once the settlement is declared false, Bellmere can be sold before any tenant knows what has happened." Mr. Harcourt lowered his voice. "His Grace has already accepted an offer." Eleanor went still. "From whom?" "A private company represented by Sir Malcolm Vane. The purchase is to be signed tomorrow morning." Sir Malcolm's name appeared in 3 disputes Eleanor had investigated during the previous year. He bought indebted estates cheaply, cleared the tenants, and stripped the land of timber and mineral rights. Bellmere's 43 families would not survive his ownership. "That explains the deadline," Eleanor said, "but not why someone placed this locket in the lake." Heavy footsteps approached in the corridor. The door opened before Mrs. Finch could stop Adrian. Beatrice entered beside him, dry and immaculate in her red gown. 2 footmen waited behind them. Adrian's eyes moved from Eleanor to Mr. Harcourt, and finally to the linen-wrapped locket. "I ordered you to surrender that, and I refused. You are in no position to refuse me." Eleanor met his gaze. "You may remove me from this house. You may deprive me of the title's privileges, but you will not compel me to destroy evidence that concerns property held under my marriage settlement." Beatrice gave a soft laugh. "Still pretending to protect the tenants? You altered the settlement to enrich yourself. Then, allow Mr. Harcourt to inspect the original." Adrian's jaw tightened. "There is no need. If the evidence is as certain as you claim, an inspection will prove you right within minutes." For one brief moment, doubt appeared in his expression. Eleanor remembered the man he had once been, the man who had sat beside her through her father's final illness, and promised that trust would never be replaced by pride. Then Beatrice slipped her hand through his arm. "She is delaying the sale because she knows the forgery will be exposed." Adrian looked at Eleanor and made his choice again. "You have 1 hour to collect your personal possessions." "I will leave," Eleanor said, "but Mrs. Finch leaves with me. My correspondence remains sealed, and no person enters my rooms until Mr. Harcourt records what remains inside them. You do not set terms in my house. Then remove me publicly by force, and explain to your guests why the lawful Duchess required witnesses against her own husband." Silence filled the room. Adrian's face darkened, but he nodded once. It was not mercy, it was fear of scandal. Eleanor slipped the locket into a small leather purse and handed it to Mr. Harcourt. "Keep this upon your person. Record the time, its condition, and everyone who has seen it." Beatrice took a sudden step forward. "That belongs to the Ravenshire family. Then you should have no objection to its protection," Eleanor replied. Mr. Harcourt secured the purse inside his coat. Adrian ordered the footmen to escort Eleanor to the West Archive. When they reached the oak door, Eleanor noticed fresh scratches around the lock. Someone had entered with the wrong key. The blue deed box remained on the 3rd shelf, but its brass clasp hung open. Eleanor lifted the lid. The original marriage settlement was gone. In its place lay a copied document carrying her name, a clumsy imitation of her signature, and a fresh, dark green seal. Beatrice smiled from the doorway. "There is your proof." Eleanor did not answer. She bent closer to the page and examined the supposed signature. The letters were convincing enough to deceive Adrian, but the ink told a different story. It was still shining along the final stroke. The document that had supposedly been signed 7 years ago had been written less than an hour earlier. Eleanor touched one corner of the copied settlement with the edge of her handkerchief. A faint green-black stain transferred to the linen. "This ink has not dried," she said. "Mr. Harcourt leaned over the page, but Beatrice reached the desk first and slammed the lid of the blue deed box. "You have handled it now," she said. "Whatever mark you claim to see could have come from your own fingers." Eleanor raised the handkerchief for Adrian to examine. "I have no ink upon my hands." Adrian looked at the stain, then at the document inside the box. The final letters of Eleanor's false signature still reflected the candlelight. He saw it. She knew he saw it because his gaze remained fixed upon the shining stroke for several seconds before Beatrice spoke. She had an hour alone after leaving the lake. That was more than enough time to prepare this trick. "I was never alone," Eleanor said. "Missus Finch remained with me, and Mr. Harcourt arrived before I left my rooms. Servants and solicitors can be purchased." Mr. Harcourt straightened. "I will overlook that insult once, Lady Beatrice." Adrian lifted the false document by its edges. "If this was written recently, who placed it here? That is the question you should have asked before accusing your wife," Eleanor replied. The words struck their target. His fingers tightened around the paper, but instead of ordering the door locked and every person searched, he folded the document and handed it to Beatrice. "Keep this safe until Sir Malcolm's solicitor arrives tomorrow." Eleanor stared at him. He had just placed the principal evidence of a crime into the hands of the woman whose accusation depended upon it. "You cannot be serious. Lady Beatrice will assume authority over the household archive tonight." Adrian removed a ring of keys from his waistcoat and placed it in Beatrice's palm. "No document leaves this room without her permission." Beatrice closed her fingers around the keys, and triumph warmed her expression. With that single act, Adrian gave her access to every deed, letter, account, and private instruction that Eleanor had spent years protecting. He could still have stopped. He could have summoned a magistrate, sealed the archive, or required Beatrice to stand aside until the disputed papers were examined. Instead, wounded pride made the decision for him. "Mr. Harcourt," Adrian continued, "you will return the locket. I cannot surrender an item entrusted to me as potential evidence. You are employed by this family. I advise this family." The solicitor corrected. "Those are not the same thing." Beatrice stepped between them. "Let him keep the trinket. Once Eleanor has left, we will recover the original settlement from wherever she concealed it." Eleanor heard the certainty beneath Beatrice's words. She was not worried about the original being found in the house. That meant it had already been moved elsewhere. Eleanor glanced around the archive without turning her head. The tall shelves, the iron deed chests, and the writing desk appeared undisturbed except for a square patch of dust beside the lower window. Something had recently been removed from that spot. Usually, a wooden press stood there for flattening folded maps and sealed documents. It was heavy enough to require 2 servants to move. "Where is the document press?" Eleanor asked. Beatrice's eyes flicked toward the empty space. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Adrian looked toward the window. "What has that to do with anything? The press was here yesterday. If someone needed to flatten a newly written document and make it appear old, it would be the most useful object in this room. And yet, this page is still wet," Beatrice said quickly. Eleanor looked at her. "I never said the press had been used on this page." Beatrice realized her mistake and fell silent. Mr. Harcourt coughed softly, concealing what might have been satisfaction. Adrian noticed the exchange, but mistook Beatrice's alarm for outrage. "Enough riddles. Eleanor, collect your possessions and leave. I will take the household books I created personally." Beatrice held up the ring of keys. "Everything produced under this roof belongs to His Grace. Not my private memoranda. Your memoranda concern ducal property. They also contain the names of tenants who reported theft by the estate steward. If those books remain here, those families will be exposed." Adrian's expression changed at the mention of theft. 2 months earlier, Eleanor had attempted to show him irregular payments authorized by Mr. Silas Crowe, the chief steward. Adrian had dismissed the amounts as bookkeeping errors after Beatrice assured him Crowe was loyal. "There was no proven theft," he said, "because you prevented me from completing the inquiry." Beatrice crossed the archive and unlocked a narrow cabinet. Inside were Eleanor's account books, tied in neat bundles with white tape. "These remain here." Eleanor watched her remove the first volume. Beatrice handled the book with practiced familiarity, opening it directly to the pages concerning Bellmere's timber income. She had seen those accounts before, although Eleanor had never shown them to her. That explained how Sir Malcolm's offer had been calculated so precisely. Beatrice had known what the land contained, what the tenants paid, and which clauses stood between her and the sale. Eleanor lowered her gaze, as though defeated. "Then allow me my father's prayer book. It is in the bottom drawer." Beatrice appeared almost amused. "Take it." Mrs. Finch knelt and opened the drawer. She withdrew a worn leather volume with gilt edges and handed it to Eleanor. No one objected. It looked like a personal keepsake of no financial importance. Only Eleanor knew that her father had never used it for prayers. He had used it to teach his daughter how contracts were constructed. Every page corresponded to a legal principle, and the margins contained examples written in his hand. Page 47 explained the creation of protective trusts. Line 12 contained the words that could prevent a husband from selling property placed beyond his direct control. Eleanor opened the book casually while Beatrice argued with Mr. Harcourt. She found the 6th word on the 12th line and counted to the 3rd letter. The letter was R. It meant nothing alone, but the miniature inside the locket showed 4 books behind the unknown woman. The numbers were not a single reference. They were the beginning of a sequence. Eleanor needed the remaining numbers, and the portrait might reveal where they were hidden. She closed the prayer book and pressed it against her chest. "I am ready to leave." Adrian's face showed surprise. Perhaps he had expected pleading. Perhaps some part of him wanted her to fight for the marriage so he could believe she still depended upon his judgment. Eleanor walked past him without another word. As Mrs. Finch followed, she quietly slipped the stained handkerchief into Mr. Harcourt's hand. The wet ink could be compared with the ink in Beatrice's writing desk if they obtained it before morning. Eleanor had lost access to the archive, but she had secured the first uncontaminated sample. At the doorway, she heard Beatrice whisper to Adrian, "You see? She knows she has been defeated." Eleanor continued down the corridor. Behind her, Beatrice opened the false settlement and then suddenly stopped. The prayer book was gone. For the first time that day, Beatrice understood that the Duchess she had tried to humiliate was not merely defending herself. Eleanor had begun to follow the trail, and if she reached its end before the sale was signed, Beatrice would lose far more than a title. Eleanor reached the front steps as the last of the garden party guests departed in uneasy silence. Her trunks had been placed beside a plain travelling carriage, while Beatrice's servants carried Eleanor's belongings as though they were removing the possessions of a disgraced criminal. Mrs. Finch climbed inside first, but before Eleanor could follow, a young gardener emerged from behind the yew hedge. It was Thomas Reed, the same man she had seen pulling the cord from beneath the stone landing. His face was pale, and mud covered both knees of his trousers. "Your Grace," he whispered, "I must speak with you." One of Adrian's footmen moved toward him. Eleanor stepped between them. "Mr. Reed is addressing me. His Grace ordered you to leave without delay. Then tell His Grace that every moment of delay is caused by his own household." The footman hesitated, unwilling to create another public scene, while several carriages still waited in the drive. Eleanor guided Thomas to the shadow of the carriage. "What did you find beneath the landing?" she asked. He glanced toward the house. The locket was tied to a cord, just as you saw. The other end ran through an iron ring beneath the stones and continued toward the boathouse. Someone could lower the locket into the water or pull it back without stepping onto the bank. Who installed the cord? I do not know, but yesterday Mr. Crow ordered me to clear the boathouse. The document press from the West Archive was inside it. Eleanor felt the pieces drawing together. The press had been moved close to the lake. The locket had been placed underwater on a retrievable cord. The false settlement had been written recently. Someone had prepared both objects as parts of the same deception. Did you see anyone use the press? Thomas swallowed. Lady Beatrice entered the boathouse with Mr. Crow after midnight. I was repairing the eastern gate. They did not see me. A shout came from the terrace. Mr. Crow was striding toward them, with 2 grooms behind him. Reed, return to your duties. Thomas flinched. I have dismissed him, Eleanor said. Crow stopped. You no longer possess authority over the staff. Then you cannot object if he leaves the estate. She opened the carriage door. Get inside, Mr. Reed. He has stolen ducal property, Crow snapped. What property? Tools from the gardener's shed. Eleanor looked at Thomas. He immediately emptied his pockets. A small pruning knife, a handkerchief, 3 copper coins, and a brass button. The knife carried the Ravenshire crest. But every gardener had been issued one. That tool belongs to the estate, Crow said. Thomas placed it on the carriage step. Now he carries nothing belonging to the Duke, Eleanor replied. Crow's expression sharpened. Where will you take him? Somewhere. Witnesses are not punished for remembering what they have seen. She closed the carriage door before Crow could answer, and instructed the driver to proceed to Bellmere. The journey took less than an hour, but darkness had settled over the fields when they reached the first tenant cottages. Lanterns burned in nearly every window. Men and women had gathered outside the village school, where a notice had been nailed across the door. Eleanor ordered the carriage to stop. A widow named Sarah Holt came forward, clutching the hands of her 2 young sons. Your Grace, Mr. Crow says the school is closed and the cottages must be inspected for sale. He says we are to prepare to leave. Eleanor read the notice. It claimed that Bellmere's ownership had passed to Sir Malcolm Vane, and that all existing tenancies would be reviewed immediately. The paper bore Adrian's printed name, but no signature, no witness, and no date of completed transfer. This has no legal force, Eleanor said. The sale has not been signed. Crow said the Duke ordered it. One of the tenants replied. Anger spread through the gathering. Several men carried farm tools. If they marched upon Ravenshire House, Beatrice would use the unrest as proof that Eleanor had encouraged rebellion. Soldiers or magistrates might be summoned, and innocent families would suffer. Eleanor climbed the school steps. Listen to me. No one will leave a cottage tonight, and no one will march against the Duke. This notice is not a lawful eviction. Until a valid transfer is completed, your tenancies remain governed by the existing agreements. And tomorrow? Sarah asked. Eleanor looked at the frightened children standing beside their mother. Tomorrow, we challenge the sale before it can destroy your homes. She asked each tenant to bring their leases into the school. For the next 2 hours, Eleanor examined every agreement by candlelight. Her father had taught her that frightened people needed more than promises. They needed to understand the exact words that protected them. 12 leases contained a clause requiring 6 months' notice. 8 guaranteed occupancy for the lifetime of the named tenant. The school building had been funded by a charitable trust and could not legally be included in a private sale. Eleanor prepared a written declaration identifying those protections, and Mr. Harcourt arrived in time to witness it. By midnight, the crowd had dispersed peacefully. Not one tenant had raised a weapon, and every lease had been copied into Harcourt's record book. It was a small victory, but it preserved the village long enough for Eleanor to fight. A carriage arrived from Ravenshire shortly afterward. Adrian stepped out alone. His face was cold. Beatrice warned me you would come here to stir the tenants against me. I prevented them from marching to your house. You filled their heads with claims that the sale is unlawful. The sale may be lawful once completed. These eviction notices are not. She handed him the paper Crow had posted. Adrian read it, and his brow tightened when he found no signature. I never authorized this notice. Then asked Crow why he acted before the agreement was signed. Beatrice says he was attempting to prevent panic. By telling 43 families to prepare for removal, Adrian looked toward the school windows, where tenants were quietly collecting their documents. What he saw did not resemble a rebellion. Eleanor gave him a second paper, the declaration Mr. Harcourt had witnessed. I have recorded every lease that protects these families. Examine them yourself. Adrian accepted it, but his gaze returned to Eleanor. You always make defiance appear reasonable. The injustice of the words nearly broke her composure. And you always call it defiance when I uncover something you preferred not to know. Thomas stepped from the schoolhouse. His hands trembled, but he faced the Duke. Your Grace, I saw Lady Beatrice and Mr. Crow inside the boathouse last night. The archive press was there, and the locket was tied beneath the lake landing. Adrian stared at him. This was no theory from Eleanor, and no interpretation of a disputed clause. It was a direct witness, naming a place that could still be searched. Eleanor held out the fresh ink-stained handkerchief. Go to the boathouse. Find the press. Compare this ink with the bottle on Beatrice's desk. Ask why Crow issued notices in your name before you signed the sale. Adrian now possessed the witness, the location, the contradiction, and the means to test the truth. For the first time, he had been given a chance to verify everything without relying upon either woman's word. Adrian looked from Thomas to the ink-stained handkerchief, then toward the road leading back to Ravenshire. For several seconds, Eleanor believed reason had finally broken through his anger. "Come with me," he ordered Thomas. "We will inspect the boathouse." Thomas took one uncertain step forward, but a second carriage appeared before they could leave. Lady Beatrice descended without waiting for a footman. She had changed into a travelling cloak, though the red silk of her garden gown remained visible beneath it. Mr. Crow followed her, carrying a leather document case. "Adrian, thank heaven," Beatrice said. "Sir Malcolm's solicitor has arrived early. He requires your signature before dawn, or the offer will be withdrawn. The gardener claims you were in the boathouse last night." Beatrice stopped. Her expression revealed surprise, then pain, each emotion arriving with suspicious perfection. "I was there because Eleanor asked me to meet her." Eleanor felt the cold settle into her bones. "That is a lie. She said she possessed evidence that would destroy the marriage settlement and offered to leave quietly if I paid her £5,000. When I refused, she threatened to accuse me of forging the document myself." Thomas stared at Beatrice. "You were with Mr. Crow. I heard you tell him to tighten the cord." Crow stepped forward. "The boy was dismissed last month for drinking. Her Grace persuaded me to let him remain out of pity. I have never drunk while employed." Thomas protested. Adrian looked at Crow. "Was the document press moved to the boathouse?" "At the Duchess's instruction," Crow replied smoothly. "She claimed the archive floor required repairs." Eleanor waited for Adrian to remember that no such repairs had taken place. She waited for him to ask why Beatrice had entered the boathouse after midnight, or why eviction notices had been issued without his authority. Instead, Beatrice touched his sleeve. This is what Eleanor does. She surrounds every falsehood with enough details to make an honourable man doubt his own judgment. Adrian's face closed. Eleanor had seen that expression whenever truth demanded that he admit a mistake. Pride offered him an easier path. Believe the accusation, punish the person who challenged him, and call the decision strength. "Return to Ravenshire," he told Thomas. "You will remain in the servants' hall until I decide what is to be done." Thomas stepped backward. "Sir, if I return with Mr. Crow, I will never be permitted to speak again. Are you refusing a direct order?" "He is under my protection," Eleanor said. Adrian turned upon her. "You no longer have the authority to protect anyone employed by me. Then release him from your service." "No." The answer came too quickly. Thomas was no longer valuable as a gardener. He was valuable because he could be controlled. Mr. Harcourt moved beside the young man. "Until a criminal accusation is made, Mr. Reed is free to leave with me." Adrian's eyes hardened. "Then I accuse him of stealing ducal property and conspiring with Eleanor to manufacture evidence." Mrs. Finch gasped. Eleanor stared at the man she had married. He possessed no proof, and he knew it. Thomas had emptied his pockets before witnesses. Yet Adrian was willing to stain a young man's name because acknowledging the truth would require him to question Beatrice. "You could examine the boathouse," Eleanor said. "You could compare the ink. You could ask why Crow posted unsigned notices. It would take less than an hour. And lose Sir Malcolm's offer while you arrange another performance." Adrian replied. "No, this ends tonight." He ordered Crow to bring the document case into the schoolhouse. The tenants, who had not yet departed, gathered outside the windows as Beatrice placed the sale agreement upon a child's wooden desk. Mr. Harcourt read the first page and immediately raised his hand. "Your Grace, the property description includes more than Bellmere Manor." Adrian frowned. Crow turned the pages before Eleanor could see them. "Merely the associated timberlands." "The Eastern Forest is not associated land," Eleanor said. "Its income secures the pensions owed to the mining widows." Beatrice shook her head. "Those pensions can be paid from Ravenshire's general revenues, which are already burdened by Adrian's parliamentary debts." Adrian's cheeks flushed. Beatrice had chosen her weapon well. She knew he would sacrifice anything rather than discuss those debts in front of tenants. "You have no place in this negotiation," he said. Eleanor moved toward the desk, but Crow blocked her. Adrian uncapped his pen. Mr. Harcourt caught his wrist before it touched the paper. "I advise you formally not to sign until the original settlement is found. Release me. If the disputed clause is valid, Bellmere is held in trust and cannot be conveyed by your signature alone." Eleanor forged that clause. "That has not been proved." Adrian pulled his arm free. "Then I will prove it before a magistrate." Beatrice removed a second document from the case. It was a sworn statement accusing Eleanor of altering the settlement, concealing ducal records, and inciting the Bellmere tenants to resist lawful authority. Adrian could have refused. He could have delayed until morning. He could have protected his wife's name while the evidence was examined. Instead, he signed the accusation first. Then he signed the sale. The scratch of the pen was almost silent, yet Eleanor felt it more violently than Beatrice's hands upon her back at the lake. Adrian had not merely chosen another woman over her. He had given that woman control of the archives, criminalized the witness who could expose her, and transferred Bellmere before confirming that he possessed the right to sell it. Sir Malcolm's solicitor added his signature and pressed a black seal onto the agreement. Beatrice exhaled with visible relief. "The matter is settled." "No," Eleanor said. "The marriage may be beyond saving, but the people who depend upon Bellmere are not yours to sacrifice." Something changed inside her as she spoke. Until that moment, some wounded part of her had still hoped Adrian would remember the man who once trusted her. That hope had kept her arguing as his wife. She released it now. She would no longer fight to preserve a marriage he had turned into a weapon. She would fight for the tenants, for Thomas, and for the truth in her own name. Adrian handed the signed accusation to Crow. "Take this to the magistrate. If Eleanor interferes with the transfer, request a warrant." Crow bowed and left immediately. Mr. Harcourt quietly guided Thomas through the school's rear door before Adrian could order the grooms to restrain him. Beatrice watched them go but did not object. Her calm troubled Eleanor more than pursuit would have. A sudden orange light appeared beyond the school windows. Eleanor rushed outside. Flames were rising above the trees in the direction of Ravenshire's boathouse. Beatrice had not needed to prevent Adrian from inspecting it for long. She had needed only enough time for someone to destroy the press, the cord, and every remaining trace of what had happened beside the lake. Then a tenant came running from the eastern road, breathless and terrified. "Your Grace, Sir Malcolm's men are already at the forest." They brought axes, wagons, and armed guards. Eleanor looked at the fresh signatures inside the schoolhouse. The sale had been completed only moments ago, yet the men had arrived hours earlier. Sir Malcolm and Beatrice had never doubted that Adrian would sign. More dangerously, they had begun stripping Bellmere before the agreement existed, and by sunrise, the forests securing the widows' pensions would begin to fall. Eleanor ran toward the eastern forest before anyone could stop her. Mr. Harcourt followed with Adrian close behind, while the tenants poured from the schoolhouse and spread across the moonlit road. The first blows of the axes were already echoing among the trees. Sir Malcolm's men had positioned wagons along the forest boundary, and armed guards stood between the workers and the approaching villagers. At their centre waited Sir Malcolm Vane, a broad man in a black riding coat, holding a copy of the agreement Adrian had signed only minutes earlier. "The property is mine," he announced. "Anyone interfering with my work will be charged with trespass." "You entered the forest before the sale was completed," Eleanor said. Sir Malcolm smiled. "I prepared efficiently. You trespassed efficiently." His smile thinned. Behind him, workers fastened ropes around an ancient oak, marked with a small brass plate. Eleanor recognized the tree at once. It stood upon land dedicated to the Bellmere Widows' Trust. The tree itself had no special value, but the boundary marker established where the protected acreage began. If Sir Malcolm removed it before the surveyor arrived, he could claim the entire eastern forest belonged to the sale. "Stop cutting," Eleanor ordered. The nearest woodsman hesitated. Sir Malcolm raised Adrian's signed agreement. "The Duke's authority outranks yours." "Not upon trust land." She crossed the boundary and placed herself between the axe and the marked oak. The armed guards moved forward, but the woodsman lowered his tool. "I will not strike while a lady stands there," he said. "Then she will be removed," Sir Malcolm replied. Adrian stepped beside Eleanor before the guards reached her. "No one touches the Duchess." The title escaped him instinctively. Beatrice, who had followed from the schoolhouse, heard it and stiffened. Sir Malcolm's gaze moved between husband and wife. "Control your domestic quarrel, Ravensshire. I purchased timber, not scandal." Mr. Harcourt took the agreement from Adrian and examined it beneath a lantern. "This description incorporates the map attached as Schedule C. Where is that map?" Crow produced a folded survey and passed it to him. Eleanor immediately saw that the line surrounding the eastern forest had been redrawn. The newer ink was darker, and the altered boundary cut directly through the brass-marked oak. "That map is false," she said. "The Eastern Trust boundary follows the stream, not the carriage road." Crow shrugged. "The estate surveyor certified it." "Which surveyor?" No one answered. Eleanor turned the paper toward Adrian. "Look at the lower corner. There is no surveyor's stamp." Adrian finally took the map. His face changed as he compared the false boundary with the land before him. "You told me the sale covered Bellmere's commercial timber," he said to Beatrice. "It does," she replied. "Eleanor is using an old charitable arrangement to obstruct your right to sell. The trust pays the widows of men who died in my father's mine. Your father is dead. The estate cannot be ruled by every promise he made." The cruelty of her answer struck Adrian more sharply than Eleanor's warnings had. For the first time, he looked at Beatrice without admiration. Sir Malcolm folded his arms. "Whether the trust is valid is irrelevant tonight. His Grace warranted that he held an unrestricted title." Mr. Harcourt turned another page, and the colour drained from his face. "Adrian, did you read the indemnity clause?" "The what?" "If Bellmere's title is challenged or any portion is excluded from the conveyance, you must repay twice the purchase price within 7 days. Sir Malcolm's smile returned. Adrian snatched the document from Harcourt. "That was not in the summary Crow gave me." "You signed the full agreement," Sir Malcolm replied, "and you secured the obligation against your unentailed properties, household revenues, and London residence." Silence spread through the forest. The entailed Ravenshire lands could not easily be seized, but Adrian's London house, his private investments, and several farms inherited through his mother could be taken. More importantly, the household revenues paid the servants, maintained the tenant roads, and covered interest upon his parliamentary debts. By signing without reading, Adrian had placed nearly everything outside the entail within Sir Malcolm's reach. Eleanor looked at the black seal beneath the final clause. She had seen that emblem before in notices from the Court of Chancery, a tower crossed by a chain. It did not belong to Sir Malcolm's timber company. It belonged to Vane Consolidated Credit, the firm that had quietly purchased the Duke's private debts during the previous year. The sale was not Sir Malcolm's true objective. It was a trigger. If Bellmere's title failed, Adrian would default. If the title succeeded, Sir Malcolm would acquire the timber, the mineral rights, and the village at a fraction of their value. Either outcome enriched him. "You did not come to buy Bellmere," Eleanor said. "You came to seize Ravenshire's unentailed property." Sir Malcolm inclined his head. "I came to enforce an agreement freely signed by a duke." Adrian turned toward Crow. "You knew about the indemnity." The steward stepped behind the armed guards. "I prepared the papers according to Lady Beatrice's instructions." Beatrice's face sharpened. "Do not be absurd. You handled the negotiations. After you promised me 10% of the timber proceeds." The alliance between them cracked in a single exchange. Neither had expected the other to speak first. Adrian reached for Crow, but Sir Malcolm's guards blocked him. "Your servant is under my protection until the transfer is complete," Sir Malcolm said. "Your protection means nothing on my land." "Is it your land?" Sir Malcolm asked. He pointed toward Eleanor. "Your wife says it belongs to a trust. Your solicitor says the title is disputed. You signed a warranty claiming otherwise. Until the question is decided, you have created precisely the uncertainty my agreement anticipated." Adrian could command servants, dismiss stewards, or order gates locked, but he could not undo his signature. His authority had become the instrument of his own defeat. An axe struck the marked oak behind Eleanor. The brass boundary plate fell into the leaves. The tenants surged forward, and the guards raised their weapons. Eleanor stepped onto a tree stump and shouted for everyone to stop. "If blood is shed here, Sir Malcolm will claim the forest was occupied by force. Do not give him the argument he wants." The villagers halted, though anger trembled through them. Eleanor instructed Sarah Holt to collect the brass marker and asked 3 older tenants to identify where it had stood. Mr. Harcourt recorded their names and the time. She then ordered the men to form a peaceful line along the stream, leaving the road clear. "We will witness every tree removed," she said. "We will record every wagon and every mark upon the timber. We will not strike first." Sir Malcolm could destroy trees, but he could not erase a documented boundary without increasing the evidence against himself. Adrian watched the tenants obey Eleanor without hesitation. These were his people, yet they trusted the woman he had expelled. That loss was not written in any contract, and no signature could restore it. A rider arrived from the village, carrying a sealed paper for Adrian. The magistrate had accepted his accusation against Eleanor. A constable would come at noon to seize her private books, search Mr. Harcourt's office, and arrest anyone accused of concealing ducal records. Sir Malcolm checked his watch. 7 hours, he said. By noon, the evidence you hope will save Bellmere will belong to the man who accused you of forging it. Eleanor looked toward the road where Mr. Harcourt's office stood. The locket, the stained handkerchief, the copied leases, and Thomas's written statement were all stored there. She had until noon to decode the locket, secure proof of the trust, and move every witness beyond Crow's reach. If she failed, Adrian's accusation would hand Beatrice the power to destroy the only evidence capable of exposing them. Eleanor did not return to Mr. Harcourt's office. If the constable searched it at noon, every object stored there would be vulnerable to seizure. Instead, she moved the evidence to Bellmere's stone rectory, a modest building that belonged to the parish rather than the Duke's private estate. Reverend Hale opened the door before dawn and admitted Eleanor, Mrs. Finch, Thomas, Sarah Holt, and Mr. Harcourt into his study. Each person entered separately and recorded the time beside his or her name. The locket was placed on a clean white cloth in the center of the table. The stained handkerchief was sealed inside an envelope. Thomas dictated everything he had witnessed at the boathouse, while Reverend Hale and Sarah signed each page. No one person would hold all the evidence. Mr. Harcourt retained the locket, Reverend Hale kept one copy of Thomas's statement, and Sarah carried another to the Widows' Trust Committee. Eleanor established the rectory as her base, because neither Adrian nor Beatrice controlled its records, its doors, or the people within them. Only after every item had been witnessed did she open her father's prayer book. The letter R, obtained from page 47, was clearly the beginning, not the complete message. Eleanor studied the miniature inside the locket. 4 books stood behind the unknown woman, each distinguished by a tiny symbol painted upon its spine: a cross, a pickaxe, a sheaf of wheat, and 3 feathers. "I know her," Mrs. Finch said suddenly. She took a candle and bent closer. "That is Lady Catherine Ravenshire, the late Duke's younger sister." Adrian had rarely spoken of his aunt. Eleanor knew only that Catherine had died unmarried, shortly before Adrian inherited the title. Why would his father place her portrait inside his private locket? Eleanor asked. "Because Lady Catherine kept his confidential records," Mrs. Finch replied. She did not trust Mr. Crow's father, who was steward before the sun. Whenever the late Duke wished to protect a document from the estate office, he gave it to his sister. Reverend Hale examined the symbols. The cross may refer to the parish register, the pickaxe to the mine ledger, Sarah said. The wheat to Bellmere's harvest accounts, Eleanor added, and the feathers to the late Duke's private correspondence. 4 books, 4 numerical references, but only one group of numbers appeared inside the locket. Eleanor turned the miniature toward the candle. A thin layer of varnish covered the painted background. At each corner, barely visible beneath the darkened surface, another set of numbers had been scratched into the metal frame. Mr. Harcourt copied them before anyone touched the varnish. 471263, 184991, 63725, and 211542. Eleanor worked through the references. The prayer book produced R. Reverend Hale fetched the parish register, and the second sequence produced E. Sarah brought the old mine pension ledger from the trust cabinet. The third produced D. The Bellmere harvest book, named by the sheaf of wheat, produced the final letter, D. REDD, Thomas read. "A name." "A direction," Eleanor said. The red door. Everyone turned toward the narrow door at the rear of the study, painted a deep oxblood color that had faded around the edges. Reverend Hale unlocked it. Beyond lay a small record room lined with shelves. Eleanor searched for the 3-feather emblem from the 4th book in the miniature and found it carved into the base of an old oak chest. The keyhole was unusually small. Mr. Harcourt placed the locket chain across his palm. Attached near the clasp was a decorative gold pin that none of them had previously examined. Eleanor removed it and inserted it into the lock. The chest opened. Inside were letters tied with blue ribbon, copies of the Bellmere trust accounts, and a sealed parchment packet, addressed jointly to Adrian and Eleanor. Reverend Hale read the inscription aloud before Mr. Harcourt broke the outer thread. The packet contained a duplicate of the original marriage settlement. Page 47 carried the late Duke's private seal and the signatures of 3 trustees, including Lady Catherine. The disputed clause was genuine. Bellmere had been placed into a protective trust at the time of Eleanor's marriage. Adrian possessed income rights under specific conditions, but he could not sell the manor, the eastern forest, or the mineral land without Eleanor's written consent and the approval of the surviving trustee. Eleanor had forged nothing. More importantly, a second letter explained why the late Duke had created the trust. He had discovered that the estate stewards were diverting rents and concealing debts. He trusted Eleanor's training in contracts and accounts to protect Bellmere, until Adrian learned to distinguish loyalty from obedience. Adrian arrived at the rectory shortly after sunrise. He entered alone, his coat smelling faintly of smoke from the burned boathouse. Ash streaked one sleeve. "The press was destroyed," he said, "but I found melted green, sealing wax beneath it, and the remains of a bottle bearing Beatrice's stationer's mark." Eleanor did not offer him comfort or praise for examining evidence, only after his signature had placed hundreds of lives at risk. Mr. Harcourt showed him the duplicate settlement. Adrian read his father's letter twice. His face lost all colour when he reached the final lines. "You knew the accounts were failing when we married," he said to Eleanor. "I knew they were being manipulated. You repaired them. I protected the tenants and paid the debts you believed had disappeared by themselves." Mr. Harcourt placed 7 years of summarized figures before him. Eleanor had recovered stolen rents, renegotiated grain contracts, and used Bellmere's profits to prevent creditors from seizing 2 of Adrian's private farms. The political career he valued had survived because his wife quietly prevented his finances from collapsing. Adrian lowered himself into a chair. "I accepted Beatrice's claim because she told me you had built the trust to control me. The trust existed before I signed it. I should have listened. You should have investigated." He looked at her with an expression she had once longed to see: regret without anger, recognition without defense. It came too late to erase the public accusation, the sale, or the warrant. "Tell me what to do," he said. Eleanor's voice remained steady. "First, withdraw the accusation against Thomas and me. Second, suspend Crow and provide a complete record of every payment made to Sir Malcolm. Third, acknowledge in writing that you signed the sale without examining the original settlement." Adrian flinched. Such a statement would damage his reputation and strengthen Sir Malcolm's claim that he had acted recklessly. "And if I do, then I will allow you to assist in protecting Bellmere. Nothing more." He understood. Cooperation did not purchase forgiveness, and remorse did not restore the rights he had discarded. Adrian took Mr. Harcourt's pen and began writing. Before he could sign, horses stopped outside. The constable entered with 4 men and presented the warrant bearing Adrian's own earlier signature. Behind them stood Beatrice. "Search the rectory," she ordered. "The Duchess has concealed stolen ducal records here." Adrian rose. "I withdraw the accusation." The constable shook his head. "The warrant has already been approved. Only the magistrate can suspend it now." Beatrice's gaze settled upon the open chest and the duplicate settlement lying on the table. Triumph returned to her face. "There it is." The constable seized the parchment packet, the locket, Thomas's statement, and the late Duke's letter. Adrian tried to intervene, but the document he had signed gave them legal authority to remove every item Eleanor had fought to secure. Beatrice watched the chest being carried outside. She had discovered their progress, captured the apparent proof, and used Adrian's own accusation to make the theft appear lawful. The constables carried the oak chest toward their wagon, while Beatrice followed close behind. Eleanor remained at the rectory door, watching every transfer. "Constable Briggs," she called, "state aloud what you have taken." The man stopped, reluctantly. Mr. Harcourt opened his record book. Under the eyes of Reverend Hale, Sarah, Thomas, Mrs. Finch, and Adrian, the constable listed the duplicate settlement, the late Duke's letter, the locket, the stained handkerchief, and Thomas's signed statement. Seal the chest before it leaves parish ground, Eleanor said. You do not give orders to an officer, Beatrice replied. I am establishing custody. If any item changes before the magistrate sees it, every witness here will know where the change occurred. Adrian stepped forward. Seal it. Briggs. Briggs hesitated, then pressed the constabulary stamp into red wax across the lock. For one moment, Eleanor believed the evidence might survive. Then a second officer seized Thomas by the arms. Thomas Reed, you are charged with stealing ducal property and assisting in the concealment of estate records. I withdrew that accusation, Adrian said. Not before the warrant was approved, Briggs replied. Thomas did not resist. He looked at Eleanor as the irons closed around his wrists. Tell them what I saw. You will tell them yourself, she promised. By 10 o'clock, the magistrate's hearing room was crowded with tenants, servants, garden party guests, and Sir Malcolm's agents. News of the Duchess's public accusation had travelled across the county. Beatrice stood beside Adrian's empty chair, as though she already held the place of his wife. Sir Malcolm's solicitor presented the signed sale and demanded immediate recognition of his client's title. Eleanor was placed at a separate table, under the watch of a constable. Thomas remained locked in a holding room, forbidden to testify until the theft charge was resolved. Magistrate Warren entered and ordered the seized chest brought forward. The red wax seal appeared unbroken. Briggs displayed it to the room, cut the thread, and raised the lid. The duplicate settlement was gone. So were the late Duke's letter and Thomas's statement. The chest contained only blank parchment, a common brass locket, and a clean white handkerchief. A wave of whispers moved through the chamber. Mr. Harcourt rose immediately. Those are not the objects taken from the rectory. The constabulary seal was intact, Beatrice said. Then the substitution occurred before the chest was sealed, Eleanor replied. Briggs's face reddened. You watched me list every item. I watched you list them. Reverend Hale watched. 5 others watched. That does not explain why they have vanished. Beatrice turned toward the magistrate. It explains everything. Eleanor filled a chest with meaningless objects, persuaded her friends to describe imaginary evidence, and now claims officers of the law conspired against her. Reverend Hale stood. I held the duplicate settlement in my own hands. You are indebted to the Bellmere Trust, Beatrice said. Your parish roof was repaired with its money. Your testimony is not impartial. Sarah attempted to speak, but Sir Malcolm's solicitor dismissed her as a dependent widow protecting her pension. One by one, every witness was reduced to someone who had benefited from Eleanor's work. The very people she had protected were used to suggest a conspiracy on her behalf. Beatrice then produced the false settlement from the West Archive. Its ink was now dry, its paper had been rubbed with dust, and the forged signature looked older beneath the dim courtroom light. This is the only document recovered from the official family archive, she said. It proves Eleanor inserted the Bellmere clause after her marriage. It proves nothing without examination, Mr. Harcourt replied. Magistrate Warren inspected the page. The seal appears to be that of the late Duke, because it was made from the broken private seal hidden inside the gold locket, Eleanor said. Beatrice smiled. What gold locket? The only one seized from you is brass. Laughter rose from Sir Malcolm's side of the room. The public tide turned. Eleanor saw doubt even upon the faces of people who had witnessed her rise from the lake, holding gold in her hand. Without the object before them, memory became vulnerable to confidence, status, and repetition. Beatrice understood that. She did not need to prove Eleanor guilty. She needed to make the truth appear too uncertain to stop the sale. Magistrate Warren lifted his gavel. Unless stronger evidence is produced, I see no reason to suspend the conveyance. Then hear my evidence, Adrian said from the rear of the chamber. Every head turned. He walked to the centre aisle without Beatrice's permission or escort. His coat was stained with ash, and he carried no ducal cane or ceremonial ribbon. I accused my wife of forgery without examining the original settlement. I authorized a warrant against her and Thomas Reed, despite knowing the gardener possessed no stolen property when he left Ravenshire. I signed the Bellmere sale without reading its indemnity clause, and I gave Lady Beatrice control of the archive while the disputed document remained unverified. Beatrice stared at him. Adrian, stop, he continued. I also announced my intention to marry Lady Beatrice, while my lawful marriage remained intact. I did so because a political patron promised to support my appointment to the Royal Land Commission if I formed an alliance with her family. The confession destroyed the honourable version of events he had presented to society. Several commissioners were present in the room. One rose and left before Adrian finished speaking. His appointment, his political reputation, and his claim to have acted from principle vanished with him. Beatrice's face twisted with fury. You would ruin yourself for a woman who deceived you. No, Adrian said. I ruined myself when I chose not to learn whether she had. His truth could not restore the missing documents, but it prevented Beatrice from using him as an unquestioned witness. Magistrate Warren postponed his ruling until 4 o'clock, allowing only 6 hours for further evidence. Outside the chamber, Adrian approached Eleanor. The chest was sealed. How did they replace everything? The seal was intact because Briggs used the same red wax at the rectory that he uses every day. A duplicate constabulary stamp could recreate it. Crow? Perhaps. But proving the substitution will not prove the settlement. Eleanor stood alone in the corridor after Adrian left to secure Thomas's release. For the first time since the lake, exhaustion overcame her. The original and duplicate settlements were missing. The late Duke's letter had vanished. The gold locket had been replaced. The boathouse had burned. Her strongest witness was imprisoned, and the magistrate was prepared to recognize the sale. She closed her eyes and saw the locket again. Newly polished gold, Lady Catherine's portrait, 4 numerical references, and the broken dark green seal hidden behind the miniature. Beatrice had not placed the locket underwater as a clue. She had hidden it because she had used the broken seal to create the false document. The cord existed, so she could retrieve the locket after the garden party, once Eleanor had been expelled and the sale completed. The push had sent Eleanor directly toward evidence Beatrice intended to recover unseen. That meant Beatrice still needed the false settlement. It was the only object connecting Eleanor to the alleged forgery, and the only paper bearing the impression made from the broken seal. She would be forced to present it again when the magistrate reconvened. Eleanor remembered something else. The late Duke's private crest contained 3 feathers of different lengths. The broken fragment inside the locket preserved only the 2 shorter feathers. On Beatrice's false settlement, the 3rd feather had been drawn into the wax by hand. No genuine impression would contain that mark. Eleanor could not merely accuse Beatrice of forging the seal. She needed to force her to swear that the impression had been made 7 years earlier, before Beatrice could know which defect Eleanor had noticed. Then, an authenticated letter from the late Duke could expose the impossible difference. Eleanor opened her eyes and turned to Mr. Harcourt. Send invitations to every creditor, trustee, tenant representative, and guest who saw the locket at the lake. When the magistrate reconvenes, ask Lady Beatrice one question before she is allowed to explain anything. Which question? Eleanor looked through the open courtroom door at the false settlement resting beneath Beatrice's hand. Ask her to swear when, where, and by whose seal that document was created. Once she answers in public, I will make the paper prove that she lied. By 4 o'clock, the hearing room could no longer contain the crowd. Creditors stood beside tenant representatives. Garden party guests crowded the rear benches, and 3 members of the Widows' Trust sat directly behind Reverend Hale. Magistrate Warren had ordered Thomas released provisionally after Adrian withdrew his theft accusation in writing, but Eleanor kept the young gardener between Mr. Harcourt and 2 Bellmere tenants so that no one could approach him unnoticed. Sarah Holt carried the duplicate of his statement beneath her cloak. Reverend Hale had brought his parish record, showing the time each object entered the rectory, while 6 separate witnesses held written descriptions of the gold locket and its contents. The physical evidence had been stolen, but Beatrice had failed to understand Eleanor's method. Eleanor never trusted a truth to one object when several people could preserve its history. Beatrice entered with Sir Malcolm and Constable Briggs. She placed the false settlement upon the magistrate's table and addressed the room before Eleanor was invited to speak. This affair began because the Duchess could not accept that her husband had discovered her deception. 7 years ago, she inserted a clause into the marriage settlement to seize control of Bellmere. When His Grace uncovered the alteration, she created an elaborate story involving a locket, a gardener, a hidden chest, and documents that no impartial person has ever seen. Her supporters depend upon Bellmere's money. Their testimony was purchased through charity. The tenants reacted angrily, but Eleanor lifted one hand and they became silent. Beatrice noticed the obedience and smiled. There, you see the control she holds over them. Respect is not control, Eleanor said. It only appears so to those who have never earned it. Magistrate Warren called for order and permitted Mr. Harcourt to begin. He approached Beatrice with no document in his hand. Lady Beatrice, do you swear that the settlement before us was signed 7 years ago? I do. Do you swear that the disputed clause was added by Eleanor after the Duke and his father completed the original agreement? Yes. And the green seal beneath the final page? Beatrice glanced at the paper. It belonged to the late Duke. Was that impression made by him? It was. 7 years ago? 7 years ago, she repeated, louder this time. And you did not create, alter, press, warm, redraw, or replace any portion of it. Beatrice turned toward the assembled creditors. I swear it before every person in this room. The trap closed. Eleanor rose. Then let us begin with time. The document was discovered in the West Archive shortly before midnight. Its signature was wet enough to stain my handkerchief. Mr. Harcourt saw it. Mrs. Finch saw it. Adrian saw the ink shining. Adrian stood from the front bench. I did. Beatrice's confidence faltered. Eleanor may have written upon it moments before we entered. The archive door showed fresh scratches from an incorrect key. Eleanor continued. Lady Beatrice received the proper keys from Adrian only after we entered. Yet when she opened the cabinet containing my private account books, she selected the Bellmere timber pages without searching. She already knew the cabinet's contents. The Duke described them to me. I did not, Adrian said. Eleanor turned to Thomas. He described seeing Beatrice and Crow inside the boathouse after midnight, the archive press standing beside them, and the cord running from the building to the lake landing. Sarah produced the copy of his statement written before the warrant was executed. Reverend Hale confirmed the original wording. Beatrice attempted to call Thomas a thief, but Adrian publicly admitted that the gardener had carried nothing from Ravenshire after returning his issued pruning knife. Now access, Eleanor said. Mr. Crow controlled the archive before Lady Beatrice received the keys. He negotiated with Sir Malcolm, posted eviction notices before the sale was signed, and prepared a false survey without an authorized stamp. Lady Beatrice asked detailed questions about Bellmere's trust, timber, and mineral income for months. Together, they possessed the access, information, and deadline required to manufacture the accusation. Sir Malcolm rose. This is speculation intended to invalidate a lawful sale. Then explain why your workers arrived before Adrian signed it. Preparation. Preparation based upon certainty. You knew he would sign because the accusation against me had already been prepared. The original settlement had already been removed, and the indemnity clause ensured you profited whether Bellmere's title succeeded or failed. Mr. Harcourt distributed copies of the sale's hidden clause to the creditors. Murmurs filled the room when they saw that Sir Malcolm could seize Adrian's unentailed property if the trust was upheld. Beatrice turned upon Sir Malcolm. You said the clause was merely a precaution, and you said the original settlement would never be found, he replied. Their brief exchange exposed more than either intended. Magistrate Warren leaned forward. Lady Beatrice, did you know a duplicate settlement existed? No. Then why did you tell Sir Malcolm it would never be found? I spoke only of Eleanor's forgery. Eleanor approached the false settlement. Now, the object. The locket recovered from the lake contained Lady Catherine's miniature, numerical references to 4 existing books, and a broken fragment of the late Duke's private seal. Those numbers led us to the red record room door and the oak chest. 7 witnesses observed the decoding before the constables arrived. One by one, Reverend Hale, Sarah, Mrs. Finch, Thomas, Mr. Harcourt, and 2 trust members confirmed the same 4 number sequences. Their accounts matched exactly. They rehearsed it, Beatrice said. Before or after you learned which books the numbers identified? Eleanor asked. The prayer book remained with me. The parish register remained in the church. The mine ledger was held by the Widows' Committee. The harvest account was stored at Bellmere. No single person controlled all 4 books. Yet the references produced the same direction. Constable Briggs shifted near the door. Eleanor turned toward him. The seized chest was sealed with red wax. Did you bring that wax to the rectory? Yes. And your official stamp? Yes. Who held the chest while you arrested Thomas? Briggs hesitated. My deputy. Your deputy, who previously worked as a clerk for Vane Consolidated Credit. The room erupted. Sir Malcolm demanded proof, and Mr. Harcourt produced the county employment register. Briggs attempted to leave, but Adrian blocked the doorway. The constable's role in the substitution was no longer an impossible accusation. It had become a traceable connection. Beatrice clutched the false settlement. None of this proves Eleanor did not forge the clause 7 years ago. You are correct, Eleanor said. The missing duplicate would have proved it directly. Since you removed it, we must use the document you chose to preserve. She asked Adrian to place a personal letter from his father upon the magistrate's table. He had recovered it from a locked drawer in his own bedchamber, where Beatrice had never possessed authority. The letter bore the late Duke's complete 3-feather seal and had been received by Adrian 8 years earlier. Adrian identified the handwriting, the paper, and the circumstances of delivery. Eleanor set the authenticated impression beside the seal on Beatrice's settlement. At first, they looked identical. Then Mr. Harcourt brought both candles closer. The genuine crest showed 3 clean feathers, each separated by a narrow line. The false impression showed only 2 complete feathers. The third had been carved into the wax by hand after the broken seal was pressed. Eleanor looked directly at Beatrice. You swore this impression was made by the late Duke 7 years ago. In one moment, the court will examine the stroke that proves the missing feather was drawn by someone who possessed his broken seal after his death. Magistrate Warren reached for the magnifying lens and lowered it toward the wax.